All right, thank you, Megan. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Hawthorne, or MC Census. Um, I am the Director of Resource and Collection Strategy Services here at Wayne State University Libraries. I have the honor of emceeing the first in a series of web events we are calling Detroit Counts, Census 2020. This afternoon's first web event is called Why the Census. Our two presenters will outline why the census matters to libraries and librarians and how the census is used to answer a myriad of questions from our users. Before we begin, I have to cover a couple of housekeeping items. One, everyone will be muted during the presentations. And if you wish to ask a question, you can raise your hand or put it in a chat window. At the end of both presentations, there will be about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, and I will moderate all questions. And please participate in our poll at the end. So without further ado, on behalf of John Cawthorn, Dean of Wayne State University Libraries, and John Hilton, Dean of the University of Michigan Library, welcome one and all to this important presentation and conversation. First up, we have Megan Courtney. She will answer the basic question, why this series is happening. Megan is the outreach archivist at Wayne State's Walter Reuther Library, and the stage is hers. All right, Megan.
Thanks, Mike. A little bit more info. If you want to see everybody, you can use gallery view at the top right. If you want to just see the speaker, you can choose speaker view. So that's up to you. But thanks, Mike, for passing this over to me to answer that kind of question. Why are we doing this series and why right now in particular? Obviously, there's a lot going on other than this today that really is about our community and what we're doing going forward. So I just wanted to check in with everybody about why Wayne State is doing this, why we're choosing this, why we think it's so important. One of the things that we've seen now and in the past couple of years and decades before that is that people are calling attention to inequality in our cities and in our country. And a lot of the programs that funding is assessed using census data are meant to address inequality. So we really see this as part of a bigger continuum, kind of figuring out how people are arranged in our world and the sort of needs that they have and how government can meet some of those needs. We think about things like Head Start programs that are meant to increase early opportunities for people. The funding for that is determined by the census. Things like Pell Grants, for example, that a lot of our students at Wayne State and at other universities depend upon to be able to attend school at higher ed are divided up based on census results. Also things like health in our community, SNAP, Medicare, Medicaid, all these things are informed by census data. And then in particular, our neighborhoods. So Section 8, small business development grants. These are they're done by census data results. And highway planning, highway construction. You know, we look at Detroit's past and we see how important the placement of highways has been and the studies that run up to that placement. And we see that even though highway planning might sound like a kind of a dry topic at face value, it really makes a big difference in people's day-to-day lives moving forward. So the data is collected every 10 years by the federal government. So because we are in 2020, we're going to collect it now. The last census was done in 2010, of course, but the census goes back much further, and our presenters today will touch on that a bit. Again, feel free to ask questions whenever they come to you in the chat, and we'll get to them a little bit later on. And then that 10-year data is used to plan the next 10 years and beyond that as well. So we wanted to make sure that we're helping people understand why this is such an important topic for all of us and how it is that they can engage with this data and engage with the process of gathering that information as well. We hope that you learn more about the census and how you can use it during this process and ask your questions whenever you want to in the chat. It's really just to reduce background noise that you're muted. So if during question time you want to speak out loud, that's permissible as well. Okay, so at this point I will pass it off to Monique if you're ready.
Hi, I am Monique Oldfield from Wayne State University Library System. And among the duties that we have here in the library, I am the government documents coordinator, but I spend most of my time working with departments and students from the School of Social Work, sociology, anthropology, criminal justice. And I lead many classes where they begin to do their first community analysis. And the census is the first step. I really like how you put it, Megan, to see how people are arranged in your state, closer to home. It's the first source of basic demographic data. And I will get up there in front of the class for the first time and talk about, I'm going to show you this great census searching tool. Now that would be data.census.gov. And people look at me about how they see what we're going to pull up, but they have I'm finding I'm getting a message that it's hard to hear me.
Monique, I can hear you now, but I think you cut out for maybe
Okay.
20 seconds if you want to just go back a smidge.
Okay. I was saying that I cannot wait to get some new 2020 census data. I'm tired of the 2010 census data. Now, the Census Bureau does have other tools that they use to gather data, but we need that, what is called, from the decennial census, the 100% count data. This is why the census form is sent to every household, owned, rented, group home, to begin to build the 100% count data, and why there will be a lot of follow-up if you have not sent in your form, or actually, really 4 out of 5 people are using the web form to send in their census form. But we right now need to have some more accurate 100% count data. And one of the areas that I think really excites students as they begin to start searching for census data is simply the age breakdown that the census provides. When you fill out your form, at this point for the decennial census, it is very basic. We still need to get more participation, but you're being asked for who you are and the people in your household. Their birth dates would determine their age, relationship to the person filling out the form, whoever that is in the
Monique, I think your sound's
of people, 0 to 5, people 80 to 85, people just 65 and over. And that is very useful to students involved in many of our degree programs who are going to be involved in planning. They're going to be involved in writing grants to get that Head Start Center, or they're going to work for school districts that are going to be making recommendations about how many schools we need to operate or build. So the basic information that you record on this census form right now really gets used in a lot of interesting ways. And we need to have the census forms filled out, so we have how many people we accurately have in your city, state, and our country. But later, you have the opportunity to use that data and craft documents, write grant proposals. It might end up affecting your congressional boundaries and the amount of representation we have. And I think I'll stop. I'll stop for there and go to Catherine or wait for some questions.
We can go straight to Catherine and then take questions afterwards.
Okay. Hi, everybody. You can hear me okay? All right. So, yeah, my name is Catherine Morse, and my pronouns are she, hers, and I'm from the University of Michigan. I'm the Government Information, Law, and Political Science librarian there. And I use census data a lot in my work. And in a lot of the same ways that Monique was talking about, doing kind of community profile work, helping students, social work students, public health students, all sorts of students think about how to do research on a community. And in addition to those kinds of students, I feel like I work with a lot of people in the health sciences. So I mentioned public health, but there's a lot of people who use census data as a way to understand, like, well, what would be a snapshot of a community? How can I come up with a good sample that I can use in doing my research? And you see that a lot in the social sciences as well. Another way that I use census data in my work as a librarian is I teach a one-credit course called Introduction to Digital Research, and it's for freshmen in the fall. And so, you know, this is like their first time at college, and we focus a lot on information literacy, and I use census data as a way to start conversations about like understanding data and understanding how data is collected and analyzed and disseminated. And I think census data is a really great example for that, because you can take something that sounds super straightforward, like a population count, like what could be interesting about that? But as you start to examine, like, well, how do you count who the population is? You see that the data collector, the Census Bureau, they have to make all sorts of decisions about how they collect it, who they're counting, how they do it, what it looks like. And we need to understand those decisions if we're going to use this data. So I think that can be a really great conversation to have with students. So I always have some interesting conversations with that. I think the way that the census collects race data is another powerful example that I use in teaching a lot. It's not quite the census that comes up with the categories for race. That's the Office of Management and Budget in the White House, but the Census Bureau follows them. And so when you take a look at those categories for race, you see that the Middle Eastern North African community isn't included in those categories. The Hispanic community isn't counted as a race. It's counted as in a separate question as an ethnicity. And so that leads to a lot of, I think, really rich discussions about, you know, about visibility and how this matters. So I guess I'll stop there.
I had to find my mute button. All right, thank you, Monique and Catherine. We now have plenty of time for questions or dialogue. So I'll get it started. We've got a list of questions already. And again, if you have any questions, you can drop them in our chat box and I will get to them accordingly. Citizenship. We heard the census will ask about our citizenship. What are the facts? Has the information been on a census has that information been on a census in the past? So the question is about citizenship. Monique, Catherine?
I can say something, and you know, somebody else can jump in too, of course. So what I would say is that going back to the very first census in 1790, it has been about counting people, residents, not just citizens and not just people eligible to vote. And so obviously in 1790, there was, you know, a very specific small group of people who could vote, but they still counted all of the people that lived there. So to me, I think that's an important thing to remember about the census, is that it's about counting people, not citizens. And so in the 2020 questionnaire, there is not a question about citizenship. That was something that was threatened, and it went to the Supreme Court, but the question isn't on there. The Census Bureau has asked that question of subsets of people in the past, but it hadn't been asked of everyone in the past. And that is true again in 2020.
Okay.
And I think that the Census Bureau has really had to put out a lot of supporting documentation that they're not asking the citizenship question. So when you seek out that information, a person would realize that they're not going to be asked their citizenship, but definitely there's been a lot of rhetoric around the citizenship, around the census in 2020 asked about citizenship that has been very distracting.
Right. Next question relevant to Detroit. How can the census data be useful to me as a regular resident of Detroit? So as a citizen of Detroit, what value does it have to me directly and personally?
Well, I think at the very base of the census is to get an accurate count of the people in your locale.
Okay. I think we may have lost your sound. Catherine, can you?
Yeah, so what I would say is the way, oh, I'm sorry, Monique, do you want to say
No,
something?
I think being part of at least the overall, being counted in the overall who lives here in Detroit is going to be important. Even if you never become one of these people doing a community analysis or using data to write a grant or using the data to know if you should build this apartment building or not. We do want to know some of the numbers in our city.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think you benefit by being counted. You benefit because the legislative boundaries will reflect your existence. You know, it's important for us to know where people live so that we can have good legislative boundaries that aren't, you know, gerrymandered, for example. It's important, like, you will benefit because census data, as Megan was saying at the beginning, it helps direct how federal funds flow into communities. So things like Head Start and Meals on Wheels, or like other kind of like senior programs, all sorts of things that money is spent according to where they identify needs using census data. So you could benefit in all sorts of ways politically, and then through funds moving into communities.
Okay. This question is related to business. How is the census data used by the business community? And that was actually my question. And Monique, her response was, census is great to plan daycare centers and nursing homes.
Yeah, I'll also just elaborate. I'll let Catherine elaborate also that there are other kinds of census products, I'll call them products, that the U.S. Census Bureau runs that also help the business community. Definitely we want this 2020 census to be filled out to get these population counts, but also the business community itself is surveyed through what is called the economic census that happens every 7 years. So there's even more that the Census Bureau does and the census does that really advocates for business. A lot of it just, where to locate the next Target, where to locate the next Whole Foods, those kinds of things are often begin with census data.
Yeah, I've helped small business owners trying to plan out, like, well, where would I open? Where would be a good place to open my business? Or I'm going to run ads, and so should I run my Spanish language ad in this community or not? So I think it really helps businesses to understand the communities they're trying to reach.
Related to that, I watch my fair share of television, and I think we've all seen commercials that have multiracial couples. And I've noticed it, but in the last couple of days, in thinking about the census and the role that it has in the business community, and to your point, Catherine, who businesses advertise to and focus on. Is it fair to say that the business community, the advertisers, are looking at the census data and seeing that America is becoming a much more multi-ethnic and inter-ethnic society, and they're sort of playing to that? Is that sort of a fair observation, or am I just watching too much Netflix?
I mean, I think that is what the data shows. Your first opportunity to even declare yourself as more than one race happened in 2000. Up until then, it wasn't even an option. Somebody had to just pick one race. And of course, we've got this political history that is the reason why that is the case. So our more than one race data starts in 2000, but you do see those communities increasing, and I think it would make a lot of sense for the business community and others to kind of recognize that and take note.
Okay. I think you sort of.
I want
Go ahead.
to add something to what
Please.
Catherine was saying. She's making some really great points about, yes, the data shows this, but like she was saying, the options to identify with more than one race, more than one lineage didn't happen until 2000. And all of that isn't just the data, it's the advocacy that went forward to allow that in the census. And because it's one of the, one of our most important data collection tools and counting tools. So, the categories, like Catherine mentioned, the Census Bureau uses established categories that I think we have to sometimes get used to that and explain that to people. But it can also be changed through advocacy.
So I hate to hog all the questions. So how important is the census as a political tool? Because when we think about advocacy in the political context and the sort of reverberations that it has, how important is the census as a political tool in shaping policies moving forward?
Well, I think it is pretty important, and I think what an organization, like how an organization counts things, really reflects its politics. And so, like the example with being multiracial and that not being an option until 2000, or there not being a category for people from Middle East, North Africa, there was advocacy done, and groups were successful in telling the Census Bureau that we want a category, and the Census Bureau was okay with it, but then that decision was later reversed. So for a while, we were going to have Middle East, North African as a box to check, and then they decided not to do it. And I think that does kind of show that the census can be used as like a tool that way. And The other example that brings to mind is same-sex couples. So in the 2020 census, if you said, I live in a house and I live with my married partner and we are of the same sex, that was legal at that time in some states and not others. But the Census Bureau couldn't, didn't know how to count it because it wasn't federally recognized. So this is the first time we are seeing data be collected where people can say, I live in a household with my same-sex partner or with my same-sex spouse. And that, of course, is only possible because of the Supreme Court case.
Okay, a political question, related question. How does the census impact redistricting and voting? When will the 2020 census data be used for elections?
So the 2020 data, they will, in 2021, they will release that initial 100% just the count, total population count data, and that will be used for states to redistrict. And in Michigan, we've got the brand new independent redistricting commission. So that group of people, so they're not the legislators, it's an independent group of people. They will use the data to redraw our boundaries in Michigan. And other states will do the same. So all of our elections after 2021 will be with these lines drawn from this data. But speaking of voting, I think filling out your census form is an incredibly important thing to do. And, there are lots of people that aren't eligible to vote. Maybe because of citizenship, or there are lots of states that deny voting rights to people with felonies or things like that, but people can still fill out a census form, and it's just a really important form of civic engagement.
Okay.
Mike, I wanted to add something.
Yeah.
I just wanted to reiterate, like Catherine was saying, that the data that will be used for the apportionments and things like that will come out in 2021. And because there's a timeline that the Census Bureau has to follow, and that timeline has been extended, that we're getting to the phase where we're going to really see people being a little bit more hounded, to turn in the forms, because and I believe that would have wrapped up in like August. Now it's going to wrap up in October. Well, that ending date of October, that gets us closer to 2021 when we want to really start using the data. And that's another reason why it's important to, for us to turn our forms in and log in and do the form, do it on the phone, but also to encourage people who have not done this to complete the census, because again, the numbers are going to have a political ramification.